Welcome back. So today we're going to have a little fun and work on making a composite today. So we're going to step away from the photographer series and work on this image that you see here. So I've selected some images and these are all going to be available online so anybody can follow along and work on these. Now normally I would take images myself, but then I have to figure a way to get them online. This is just a lot easier. Now if you do take images offline, anybody can just grab any image that they think looks cool and try to put it together and make it look good. The issue here is that when you're trying to do a composite, your perspective in certain items in the image need to be shot very similarly. Those are, first, the horizon line being in the same spot helps a lot. Perspective sort of needs to be the same. Shooting with the same lens is very helpful. So if you shoot with a wide angle 35mm lens and you take all your images with a 35mm lens, that can dramatically help you when you're trying to do a composite. So we have some images here, and if you look, notice that this is just camera height. So on this image right here that we're looking at, the photographer is squatting down and low to the ground. Notice where the horizon line is, and we have movement this way. Now we can deal with that. Really, the perspective in the way this subject is walking is good, but this photographer is standing straight up. So that angle is completely different. So we have a very flat kind of ground here, and then we have this angled ground here. Well, if I took this person and tried to put them here, it would look like really weird, like position. It looked like she would be leaning backwards. If I took this person and put them here, it looked like they're falling forward. And so the perspective would be off, and it looks really odd when you do certain situations like that. Now, we also have a couple different photos that I have downloaded and are going to be in the folder, and they're just of birds. And some of the birds are shot with a long focal length lens, and some are shot with a wide. So I'm going to show you when we do the tutorial, the different bird photos and why one works and the others don't really work. And it has to do with how items are shot in Photoshop. Lighting can also be very helpful when you're working on a composite. Make sure that when you download images that they're going to be able to work together. And so we'll take a look at our images and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to hide this. I'm going to go through a process, and if you've never seen this before, it's a way to open all of your images into one file. Now, hopefully this works, because when I did this last night, it only opened some of the files, and I'm not really sure why it did that. But if it doesn't work, I have a way to do the same thing, basically, in a different way. So we're going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into a stack, and it's doing exactly what it says. It's going to take all the files and load them as layers. I'm going to hit Browse. Now I've stuck all my photos in this folder here, and we're just going to select all those and we're going to hit Open. And this should open all these images and let us be ready to go and work. We'll see if it actually does what it's supposed to do. And no, it's not. Once again, it's only opening a few of the images, and I really have no idea why it's doing that. So we're going to hit Don't Save. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit Open. And we're going to go to that same folder and hit All. This is just another way of doing the same thing. So we're going to open all those images into Photoshop. Now, each one's going to be on its individual tab, and that's what I don't want. So now we're going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into a stack. And I use this all the time. This is the first time I've ever seen it not work. So in this case, instead of Browse, we're going to hit Add Open Files because we already have those files open. Now there are attempts to automatically align source images. These images are not alike, so we're not going to do that. And we're not going to create anything as a smart object at this point. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK. Now it should take all these files and load them into a stack, which is just like that and exactly what we wanted. Cool. Now we have all of our different files under one tab. So I'm just going to close out these other tabs. All right, so we've got everything here in one tab. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and turn most of these files off. Now this is going to be our main background image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this layer below that layer, and then I'm going to turn this layer off. So this is our base layer. So our next layer is going to be this woman here, and I will activate that. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut her out of this background. Now, this is not the greatest file. She's actually not tack sharp. When you're trying to cut stuff out of backgrounds and your background's not a white seamless, if this was me, I would have shot this on a white seamless. It would make it a lot easier to cut out. So it's going to be kind of difficult to cut out. And since it's not super sharp, Photoshop doesn't do a good job of selecting places that aren't sharp. It might look a little raggedy on the edges, but I think we're going to have so many overlays that it shouldn't really matter too much in this file. Now, this is one image where things are different. So the horizon line's kind of the same in both of these images. We're both down low. However, this is shot with a long telephoto lens, and this is a wide angle lens. If I tried to stick her on the road, it might look a little odd, but what we're going to do is we're going to kind of cut her off here, and like she's walking in the very forefront of this frame. So I think we're going to be okay with that. Having an image cut out that's shot with a long telephoto versus a wide angle can be a little bit weird. So what we'll do is just grab this new object selection tool, and I will make a selection around her saying that this is the person or item that we want. All right, did a pretty good job, but it didn't get this little book that she's carrying. So we're going to go ahead and reselect that again, say, hey, we want that book. It still didn't get it all. All right, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to go over to selected mask. You almost always need to go into selected mask. And what we're going to do is just make this actually a little bit darker so I can see. And we're going to try to get some of these little bits here that we're missing. So we're going to slide smooth over, make sure smart radius is on, and we're just going to paint over that little white spot. Now we're zoom in, so I'm using Command plus, space bar, and then we're just going to kind of come in here, see if we can select these areas better. They're kind of dark, and it's having a difficult time understanding what's what. So I'm going to make this a little, we're going to go under these arms and just try to get this selection in here. Now you can see what it's doing. It's selecting that area out, but it's also getting part of her arm as well. This is what happens when you don't use a white background. All right, so that selection is not perfect, and I'll go back in and take that out, I think. So we're pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a layer mask. So I'm just going to hit OK. So that's going to be our subject cut out in a layer mask. Now you can see little bits where it is messed up and doesn't look good. So we're going to go in here and fix that. So we're going to grab our brush, and remember black is hiding, so it's going to remove those areas. I've got my brush a little bit harder than normal because I want to hide these little bits. Probably going to make this softer when we get in here to this edge so it doesn't look too harsh. Now normally, if I was really doing this, not for tutorial, you would see me zoom way in here just like that, and I would be very accurate as to what I was doing. So I would come in here, I would have a really harder brush, and I would just be very accurate at making this selection out of this background. Notice that we have a little halo or edge. That's pretty normal to have a little halo like that. So it's hard to get these corners, so a lot of times I'll paint the corner, then flip it back to white, and then kind of paint those areas back in if you don't get them right. You can see here's that horrible edge. That has to do with, you can see she's out of focus, and so it's not really picking up the detail that good. So let's come in here. Now, a lot of times when you have this little halo around the subject, we can see it here. We can easily paint that in or out. One way to get rid of that is to use minimize. So if you go up to filter other, and then you hit minimum, not minimize, sorry. You can change that. It's kind of like the shift tool in the selected mask. But basically, if I move it back out, it's here. And as I move it this way, it's shifting that mask over this direction. So you can see it's cleaning it up. It's doing it in full pixels, like 1, 2, 3, 4, but you can do points. So I could put in here like 3.7 if I wanted, and it would do 3.7. We're just going to use 4 pixels. And you also have, you can do this in squareness or roundness. Right now it's a pretty straight line, so we're just going to do squareness. But if you have something that's round, you might want to switch that to roundness instead. So that looks pretty good. Now there's still some little bits, like I can see some right here, some little bits. Whoops, wrong color. And you can go through and clean all of this stuff up. Now we have this arm here, so we're going to hit X again. And we're going to try to just really quickly get this stuff back. So basically I'm just painting it in. There's all kinds of different ways to make selections. This really isn't a selection tutorial, but we're just doing the best. Like, well, I need to select that out, and I'm just not going to do it because it's going to take too much time. This is going to be a long video no matter what we do. So it didn't get this. We want this little bit here. It's not perfect, but that looks pretty good. Hit X again because we need to subtract this area, not add. All right. Go back up. X again to get the opposite color. And so I'm not even looking at my X. My finger just basically lives on that. So it's just easy for me to press it. So that looks pretty good. We're not going to get the greatest selection, but we've cut her out pretty good. And this is going to work for this tutorial. So what we're going to do now is move her. So we're going to put her right smack in the center of the screen. So I will move her and try to put her on the road. Now, obviously, she's way too big because she was shot with a telephoto lens. But you can see how that foot would kind of hover and look weird. So the point of contact is kind of back here. I'm not sure if we could ever get this to look perfect. So what we're going to do, and we're going to have to imagine, let me crop this out here. We're going to hit here. We'll make sure that we get everything up here. And then we'll just come up to there. Crop that out for now. And so now you can see what we're going to do. We're going to have her walking sort of off this image. Now, we don't really want her knees cut off. That's not typically, you don't want to cut someone off their knees in photography. So we're just going to lower her a little bit. Get sort of the top of that knee. And that looks pretty good. It looks like she could be walking off there. Now, the issue here is color. Obviously, this is completely neutral and this is warm colors. Don't worry about this because we're actually going to come in here and change the colors of these areas. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn on this next layer. So we have this picture of this old kind of cabin barn thing here. We're going to cut this house out and we're going to take a look. It might go over here. It might go over here. We'll see which way we like it. So the first thing we're going to do is grab that object selection tool. Whoops. That didn't work out so good. And we're going to go ahead and circle this and hopefully it will do a pretty good job of selecting that out. And no, it did not. That's because we don't have the right items selected. Remember, when you're using this stuff, you still have to select layers or things don't work correctly. And just like anybody, everybody makes mistakes, even me. So we're going to come down here and we're going to now create a mask, and we've cut that little guy out. And so we can either set this here or we can probably flip it and set it over here. I think I'm going to set it over here. I like the angle of it. And so we're looking pretty good. Now let me zoom in. This actually, because I've done this thing, when you're putting an image in here, and remember our light is coming from behind this. So we're going to end up darkening this shed or barn here. But a lot of times when you set something on, you can see that line. Now you can make a brush that is sort of similar to the texture of whatever this is. Then we can sort of blend that in. So we put some of this grass overlapping the top of the image. I'm just going to grab the brush, and we've got white, and I'm not going to make a brush with it, but I'm going to paint in here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about or doing. So I've got this image, we've got this selected, and then we're just kind of painting. Now, what that's doing when I do this is it's bringing in the foreground from this picture. That's what I don't want. What I can do is hit X and block it out. And now I'm bringing in texture of this. So you can see it now. It kind of looks like it's kind of grown up a little bit in that one spot. Or here we can make it grow up. And we can have sort of a random border. So it actually looks like that this item is in here in this location and makes sense. And it's kind of like falling down into that area. You can get really specific in how you do this type of stuff, but we're not going to be able to see that much detail in it. So I think this is going to look pretty good. And that really helps sort of blend items in. This is something that I typically do a lot. Now we want to darken this. So our sun's back here and our sun's coming this way. So we're going to need to add a shadow, but we're also going to need to darken this building. It's a little bit too bright. What we're going to do is make a clipping mask. So I'm going to go up here and make a curves adjustment layer. And I am going to go in between the two layers here. So what a clipping mask does is say, hey, I want to apply this curve to just this image, not everything here. So I'm going to hold the Alt option, go between the layers, click, and now we have a clipping mask. And now, as I darken this image, it's only going to darken that barn. It's not going to darken anything else. And so that looks pretty good, but it's getting a little bit contrasty. So we're going to actually just lighten up the contrast there. Just kind of flatten and darken this out. And that looks pretty good. That's better. We can always come back in and further adjust that. Turning that, we can see what we've done. We've really darkened that. Because remember, our light's coming this way. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we need to create a shadow for this barn here. We've got our sun kind of like way down here, and what we need to do is create a shadow that's falling this way. So I could kind of make a selection of this, flip it, and blur it, but I don't think it's necessary. So I'm just going to grab the lasso tool. I'm going to go to this point. I'm going to hold my Alt option. This turns this into the polygonal lasso tool, and we're just going to come up here. And we're going to make a little selection just like that. Now it's not perfect. It kind of, this angle is going out that way, but I think we're going to be okay. And then right above that layer, what we're going to do is create a new layer. So we're going to go right here to the new layer icon, and we're going to shift delete and fill it with black. So there's our shadow for our barn. Now, obviously, it looks totally black and not good. So we're going to change our blending mode to multiply. Multiply is taking the top color, which is black, and darkening the layers below it. It's not replacing it, it's darkening it. And now we're going to lower that opacity. And what this is going to do is sort of darken this. Now let's hide this. So I'm just going to click out here to sort of hide that selection. Now, right now, it's a little bit harsh on that edge. That edge is a little bit harsh. So what we need to do is we need to blur this. So we're going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. That's probably going to be way too much. And we're just going to blur this until we get sort of a nice, softer edge. The sun's pretty low, so it's going to be sort of a harder shadow, but that looking pretty good right there. We're just darkening and blurring that one area. So I've got this shadow. I think this looks pretty good. And we'll just go ahead with 36 for right now and say we're okay. So now we have this shadow. Now I could do some more things to the shadow to kind of blend it in. It's looking pretty good. So I think we're just going to go with that with now. We can always go back in and edit that one specific spot. The next thing that we have here is this. So I'm going to take this coyote. I'm going to move him down a little bit. And so here he is right here, and we're going to put him over here inside of this kind of cut wheat or grass area. So we're going to need to zoom into him. So normally I would just use the zoom tool, but that's okay. So we'll grab this object selection tool and see how well select this little guy out. He's nice and sharp, so this is going to probably do a pretty good job. That looks pretty good. It looks like it's missing his foot a little bit. We can try to say, hey, get that little foot there. So we're going to go ahead and just make a mask. I think it's going to be good because we're going to put him down in, and I don't know if you're going to see that or not. So we're going to make a mask on that. Boom, he's gone. It's a little soft. You can see right here, this is where we missed that foot. Now, you can see some areas that have been lost. Whenever you're working with the mask, you can always go up to select and go back up into selected mask. Now, remember in selected mask, we can use this kind of feather refine tool to sort of try to pick up that fur along the edge of his body. But because the background is very similar, you can see it's picking those items up as well. So that's one reason I didn't do that. But I can grab the brush, and I want sort of a hard brush, and I can fill in some of these areas manually, just where we've kind of lost him and we know he would be. So we have these feet. I'm not sure where they go. So we've his paw. Then I'm going to hit X, and I'm going to paint out what I didn't want. And you could go do this everywhere. So right here, we've lost a little bit. It doesn't need to be perfect. So this looks pretty good, I think, for right now. So we'll just kind of say that that looks good. Actually, let's go here and get his little mouth a little bit better. Hit X, and I can paint out some of that darker black that I don't want. And so this looks pretty good. It's gonna be really small in the image. It doesn't need to be that perfect. So we're gonna come up here and grab this move tool, and then we'll set him kind of back in here. I don't want to get him above the horizon line. So I think that looks pretty good there. And what we need to do now is sort of blend him in. So we just go ahead and grab this zoom tool, and we'll get in here. And we're going to do sort of the exact same thing that we just did. So we're going to take the brush and some black, and what you can do is just kind of hide him in. So remember where I said we didn't really need those feet? This is where don't needing those feet kind of comes in. We're just kind of painting that in so it looks like his foot's down into that grass. Now, a lot of this stuff stands out and doesn't look really good at this point, but it's because the colors aren't right. You're going to be like, wow, it blends in a lot better once I get the color. Now, just like we did with this barn over here, we need to create a little shadow for him as well. We'll come in here and just make a little area. And we need a new layer. Shift delete, black, blending mode, multiply, lower the opacity. We don't need that selection. And then we're going to do the same Gaussian blur as I did before. You can see we've got that little Gaussian blur. And that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to put a mask on this. And the reason that you can put a mask on stuff is just sort of to paint some stuff in or out. So that looks pretty good. We'll just go with that shadow there. I think it's a little bit too bright. We'll just make it a little softer. So I've got a nice shadow there for him. Come back over to that shadow. See if we need to lower that a little bit. Just do that there. So that looks pretty good. So we've got a shadow. Not the greatest shadow, but it worked pretty good. Now we also are going to need her to be darker. She's illuminated pretty well. We're going to click on her layer. We're going to make a curves adjustment layer. Now we need to clip this as well. So we're going to hold that Alt Option, go between the layers, clip this layer to here, and we're just going to darken her up a little bit because she would not be that bright. We're going to lower that contrast a little bit and just we're really flattening out and darkening her up. She would not be well illuminated. So it looks pretty good. Once again, remember, we're going to change these colors and you're going to be like, oh, wow, everything looks a whole lot different now. So the next thing we have are birds. So we have this image of birds, and let me try to turn these two images. So you can see this image, which is a little bit bigger. We have this image, which is a little bit bigger, but both of these were shot with the long telephoto lenses. Notice they're just long. It's just picture of birds. Same thing here. This one's definitely not going to work. We have pictures of birds. Let me transform this and just make this bigger, and we'll turn this off. You can see it's just way too flat. So if I was to take this image here and put this in the background, so what I'm going to do is just change that blending mode to multiply. And it's still not even working, but you can see the birds are all flying around right in the plane where her head is. This is one where kind of that focal length of the lens just doesn't work right. So here's our next image, and I can move this. Now I can definitely blend this image in here as well. So I can blend this, but once again, the birds aren't going to be in the right plane. They're all just kind of in one area, and I don't think that would be as realistic. So we're going to take that layer and we're going to delete that. Now I've got this layer, which is a little bit too small, but you can see it's got a really wide perspective. So there's some birds way back here and some in the foreground. And we have a horizon line that we can sort of match up here. So what I'm going to do is hit Command T, and I'm going to make this so this image is going to be big enough to fit. And then I'm going to lower that opacity a little bit. So what this opacity is letting me do is I can line these horizon lines up sort of the same. So now that we don't want this part of the image, we just want the sky. So now our horizon lines are sort of lined up. I can come back into the opacity and put that back up. Now what we're going to do here is we need to make a mask, but we're going to create a gradient in this case. So we're going to come over here to the gradient tool. So we've got black to white. Now what I'm doing with a gradient is I'm trying to blend this top picture with this picture. So you can see that we're blocking out this area with a gradient. So there's a smoother transition. And sometimes it takes a couple times to get used to like where this should be. We've got this gradient. Don't worry that we're losing her. All we got to do is take that picture and put it below, and it's not a big deal. So we can do that right now. So if I take this image and put it below her, now it's not blending over her. Good to go. So we can see that looks pretty good. But remember, a gradient is sort of a straight line. So you can always come into a gradient or anything like that. If I needed to come in here and paint out where the gradient is blending over that house, I could easily do that, and that would fix that area. So that looks pretty good. So now we've got the birds in sort of the right perspective, and this is looking a whole lot better. So what we're going to do is go up here to this very, very, very top layer, and we're going to do a solid color overlay. This is going to be the first step in sort of making everything look good. There's no adjustment for solid color, so you need to come into the layers palette and go to solid color. And I've got this for some reason here. So we're going to make this a very kind of blood red. So we'll try that as our blood red. So we'll put this image, and you can see, boy, does that not look good because you can't see anything below it. But if you change your blending mode to color, it colorizes everything in the image this color. Now it's a little bit too red. I wish that we had a little yellow. So what I'm going to do is kind of bring this over. Yeah. Right there to get a little yellow in that. And that's looking a lot better. And I'll say, okay. So now this color is a whole lot better. But I do want some of the color from the image below to come through. So it's just not monochromatic. So I'm just going to dial some of this out until we're starting to get sort of a blend of the two images. So I've got some of this image, solid color, and some of the ones below. So the higher I have it, that looks pretty good. Got that image and it's blending through. This coyote is a little bit too bright. Once again, I think we need to darken him. So we're going to come up to him. We're going to make a curves adjustment layer. We're going to clip him. Alt Option, clip this layer to him. We're going to lower his contrast because we really want him more of just like a silhouette. And that looks a whole lot better. So we've clipped that to him. Now he's dark. He's starting to fade in there a little bit more accurately. And this is looking good. The one issue I'm having is this wolf seems to have a lot of yellow in it. So we're going to come up to this and we're going to go ahead and make a hue saturation adjustment level and go into yellow. And we're going to just desaturate that a little bit. For some reason it didn't clip, but we'll just come in here and clip it now. So there we go. So turn this on and off so you can see we're just kind of desaturating him so he's a little bit more accurate. I think that I'm going to take this layer and duplicate it. So I'm going to hit Command J and I'm going to take this down to the wolf and I'm going to clip, and that's going to clip to the coyote as well. And it automatically did that. So now we have also clipped this to him. So we're getting a little bit of that color in him. So he's looking a little bit more accurate. Well, this looks pretty good. I think just the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and command click on the mask. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer above this layer. And notice this layer is getting clipped down too, which is I want. I'm going to shift click and I'm going to make this black. And then I'm going to change that blending mode to multiply. And I'm going to dial out a lot of that. I'm going to, let's get rid of the Command D to get rid of that. And that's looking a little bit better there. Basically, he was just a little bit too bright in the front of this image. So we're going to click on this layer right here. And then we can just kind of dial that out. And that's going to help sort of darken that wolf up to where he needs to be. And I think that's looking better. We could do this here. It still has a little bit in the highlights that I'm not totally thrilled with. And the way you do that, once again, is Command click on the mask. That will make the selection. You'll make a new layer above that. Shift delete goes to fill command black. Now we got this in the wrong spot. So we're going to move this guy down here. That looks good. So now you can see it's overlaid. We're going to change that blend mode to multiply. And we're just going to dial that out. And that's going to help fill in some of those shadows there. Not shadows, highlights. So I can come down here and just click on this. And you can see it's just kind of muting and making that look a little bit more realistic. I'm pretty happy with that. I think that leg here is a little bit too dark. Once we can come in here and we can easily just sort of paint on that. So I'll grab the brush in black and I'll take my flow way down. And I just kind of will paint black over it, sort of blend that in. Maybe a little bit too much. That's looking pretty good. We're just kind of blending that into the background. And that's basically it. So hopefully this has been helpful. You learned a little bit about compositing today. And we did something that's a little bit more fun versus learning the fundamentals of Photoshop. If you have any comments or questions, leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.